I'm just gonna go straight into it. My name is Dr. Mudzuli Mapuhpha, and today I'll be presenting with Dave Langsford. So we'll be presenting together, and I'll be doing part of the presentations, and then we'll switch in between. So Dale will be in charge of controlling the slides. I hope we are in sync. All right, so the title of our presentation is What are the pedagogical induction needs of new lecturers in different disciplines? So I'd just like to mention that we are candidates for the ECAD program, and this is our project for the program. Dale, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is the plan of action for our talk today, which is talk about pedagogic induction and what do we mean by that. We'll then define the problem, and our disciplines have different priorities, and we'll be using the LCT model to define those priorities. After doing that, then define the PCK to enact discipline-specific pedagogic induction. And then we'll then introduce you to our induction tool, which is currently a draft, where we identify our pedagogic development experiences, expectations, needs, and progress. And then finally, our draft induction tool and what it could do. If you go to the next slide, please. All right. So for this project, we are a group of 5 individuals working on this project. So we are all newly appointed lecturers at the university, and we come from a diverse range of disciplinary backgrounds. So 3 of us are from teacher education, and each from a different discipline within teacher education. As you can see, we have Dale from curriculum, we have Mapuhpha from geography, we have Raina from mathematics education, myself from chemistry, and Ishad from engineering, specifically mechanical engineering. So what makes us similar is that we all need to teach our respective disciplines. Right? So before we go any further, I would just like to acknowledge that this work is still in progress. We're just reporting on a pilot study. Go to the next slide. So new appointees at the university participate in various induction and onboarding programs. So these include early career academic development, or ECAD in short, the Now at VIT series, and school-specific onboarding initiatives. So there are useful workshops also offered by the CLTDs, which share a range of information that is relevant to our work here at VIT. However, for many new lecturers, teaching is a new practice, and teaching at VIT is new for everyone. Sure, teaching is teaching wherever or whatever you teach, but teaching expectations of different teachings are different in different spaces and disciplines. So this project looks at how we can contribute to the pedagogic specific induction of new lecturers at the university. By pedagogic induction, we mean induction into the organization of knowledge, the teaching of knowledge, and the assessment of that knowledge in the various disciplines areas. We'll go to the next slide. So this is where our problem lies, right? We all come from different disciplines. And as we saw earlier, from different specializations within those disciplines. But now we need to teach at university. So to understand why the teaching of our different disciplines is not a one-size-fits-all, we need to look at what makes our disciplines different. Then how do we do this? To do this, we turn to Carl Morton's legitimation code theory, or LCT for short, which is a social toolkit for revealing the generative mechanisms or rules of the game of social practices. So Dale will go in detail to define the LCTs for different disciplines and she'll then explain how this applies to our project. Over to you, Dea.
Thank you so much, Mudzuli. Hi, everybody. So LCT is the sociological toolkit that has several dimensions for revealing different aspects of practices. But for this project, we're going to use what's called the specialization dimension of LCT at this stage, and we're using the specialization dimension to help us to understand what success looks like in a particular discipline. And to do this, two concepts from LCT are operationalized. The first is epistemic relations, which describe how specialized knowledge, the knowledge that's required to succeed in the discipline is. So we can plot relative strengths of epistemic relations along a continuum from less specialized knowledge, where what we say is the epistemic relations are weaker, to more specialized knowledge where the epistemic relations are stronger. Similarly, social relations describe how specialized the ways of thinking and knowing that are required to succeed are in the discipline. So the relative strengths of social relations are also plotted along a curriculum from less specialized ways of knowing called where the social relations are weaker to more specialized ways of thinking and knowing where the social relations are stronger. And relative strengths of epistemic relations and social relations together can be set up as a Cartesian plane, which gives rise to 4 combinatory codes. Oopsie, sorry. And disciplines, for example, in the knowledge code up here, in the top left, generally value more the acquisition of specialized knowledge, and it's not that specialized ways of knowing are not important for success, they're just less important. Disciplines in the knower code in the bottom right generally value less specialized knowledge. Perhaps they value the acquisition of various bodies of knowledge, but they do value the acquisition or the development of specialized ways of knowing and thinking for success in the disciplines. Disciplines in the elite code value both the acquisition of specialized knowledge and specialized ways of thinking and being and knowing. And in the relativist code, it's more generic knowledge that's valued is less specialized, and less specialized ways of knowing is valued. So now, using the specialization plane, we can identify what the disciplinary priorities are within our various fields. And this is going to give us an idea of how success differs from one field to another. So to analyze the priorities for success in our different disciplines, we have defined 4 strengths of epistemic relations and 4 strengths of social relations. At the bottom of the epistemic relation axis is the weakest epistemic relations, where general knowledge can be drawn on to succeed in the discipline. Slightly stronger, but still quite relatively weak, epistemic relations is where there are different bodies of knowledges that can be drawn on. A little bit stronger epistemic relations is where concepts and procedures must be enacted. And the strongest strength of epistemic relations is where specific facts and protocols must be drawn on to succeed in the discipline. On the far left of the social relations axis is the weakest level of social relations, where there are no personal qualities or special ways of thinking that are required to succeed. As long as you can follow the instructions, you will succeed in the discipline. Slightly stronger, but still relatively weak social relations to the right requires that the student or the knower can explain their reasoning. Slightly stronger, moving to the right, is where success requires the interpretation of particular scenarios. And developing particular specialist ways of thinking and seeing the world is where is the strongest strength of social relations for our particular study. So each of us in the ECAD group answered a set of questions in our induction tool that gave rise to the findings that I'm going to show you now. But unfortunately, we don't have time to go into the questions, but they will be part of publications that are planned. So for my discipline in teacher education, in general, to succeed in curriculum, students need to be able to draw on various bodies of knowledge to demonstrate a particular way of thinking, which we call pedagogic reasoning, which puts my field of teacher education quite squarely in the NOAA code. Mapuhpha is the geography educator, and for her also, student teachers need to be able to draw on these different bodies of knowledge to develop specialist ways of thinking, but also as a geographer, she feels that if students can draw on different knowledges and follow particular instructions, they can be, that's part of also being successful as a geography student or to teach geography. For Rena, as a mathematics educator, for her, she also believes that students need to be able to draw on these different bodies of knowledge to develop specialist ways of thinking, but also because of mathematics as a discipline, students need to acquire specific facts and protocols to succeed in her subject. Mudzuli said that for chemistry, students, generally to succeed, students need to use specific facts and protocols and be able to implement a set of instructions, putting chemistry in the knowledge code. And Irshad reported that for his mechanical engineering students, they need to have a grasp of quite specific facts or protocols, but be able to use them for the purpose of interpreting particular scenarios and problems. And so that puts mechanical engineering in the elite code. We've seen how our different disciplines have different priorities and therefore different criteria for success. So now this is where our problem sits. We need to, how do we learn to teach them at Wits University? As the facilitator said, often lecturers are hired because of their disciplinary expertise. And we feel like a generic teaching induction might not give new lecturers the criteria for good teaching. Discipline-specific or even school-specific pedagogic induction could be an option, but there are nuanced differences between areas within the disciplines. So, for example, we saw that with the 3 teacher education fields. So what now? What's the next stop? We felt that a useful place to start is to understand what teaching is itself, which is in itself a slippery idea. But it's important to know that even though we've watched teachers for the last 12 years, at least at school and then lecturers at university, we can't assume that we know how to teach, even though it looks like we could. We can't be lulled into a false sense of understanding what it means to teach, because teaching is not simple or procedural or natural. It's highly complex, it's specialized, and it's a rational practice. It has its own logics, just like any other discipline. And while many concepts work to understand what it is that teachers must know and do to teach, perhaps the most popular and accessible is Lee Schulman's concept of pedagogical content knowledge, or PCK. And Schulman says that teachers draw on several bodies of knowledge to teach, but the most important body of knowledge is pedagogical content knowledge, or PCK. It's the blending of the content, of knowledge of the content, of knowledge of where, how to teach, as well as knowledge of who and where you teach, which I have on this diagram as students. And this blending happens to consider how best to teach this content to these students. And what's really important for us is that with PCK, a bedrock idea is that the teaching of a subject or discipline starts with an understanding of the structure of that subject or discipline. Shulman says to teach is first to understand, and he explains that the teacher should understand not only the knowledge itself, but also how it relates to other bodies of knowledge, the purposes for which that knowledge is being taught. And so that's why we actually undertook the specialization analysis of our disciplines before looking at the teaching of a teaching induction, before looking at how it could help us to work through a teaching induction. Over to you, Julie.
Oh, thank you, Dale. So as you can see here now, we are at a useful point which was central to our development of our pedagogic induction tool for the disciplines that we've been piloting. Right. So if you can go to the next slide. So our induction tool is administered over a particular timeline as far as possible. Right. So the new lecturer basically fills in the first few sections of the pedagogic induction tool. So some of them are listed here as sections A all the way to D. We'll discuss this in detail in the following slides. Then the lecturer will then plan their lecture for the day ahead of time, and then after that they'll then complete a self-reflection. So this is done 2 hours prior to the lecture, and then during when they conduct the lecture, then the peers will then come and observe their lecture and then take notes. And then after that, in about 24 hours after the lecture was given, they'll then do a self-evaluation, which they then go through some of the questions in the induction tool. And then after, the peers will then arrange an in-person or a online reflection or sort of debrief to get feedback from their peers before they plan their next lecture. We'll go to the next slide. So the induction tool has several sections, but the first 4 sections are filled in only once. And thereafter, the last 3 sections are used over and over for each lecture. So the tool begins with a few biographical questions, some questions about the lecturer's teaching and professional experience. This is to create a profile of the participants in the study, and it's not necessarily it's not necessarily going to stay in the induction after the study. So if you look at section C, the section C asks the lecturer about the experience of induction he had fits, also for research purposes. So it too is unlikely to remain as part of the tool if it's used beyond the study. And then we have section D, which asks important questions about the lecturer's subject's discipline, right? So this was used for the specialization analysis that was done earlier. So at this point, we have included it to see how our disciplines are different, but we may develop it a little bit more to give users of the induction tool some insight into the legitimation codes in their disciplines. as these do have a bearing on the alignment of their teaching and assessment, for example. And then we have section E, which is where lecturers self-reflect just before they teach the lecture. And in section F, the peers will then observe and record their feedback for the lecturer. And G, the lecturer evaluates their teaching using a set of questions 24 hours after the lecture, as I mentioned before. And then next, we're going to look at each section of the two and some of the insights that it has afforded us so far, starting with section A to D. So sections A to D, they give you a sense of kind of samples we have in the pilot study, right? So we have a diverse sample in terms of gender, race, age, teaching experience, and experiences of pedagogic induction. And section D reveals significant differences in the pedagogic priorities of our respective disciplines, which is where we got the data to show how disciplines differ earlier in the presentation. So now let's look at the last three sections of our induction tool, which are what support the new lecturers developing pedagogic practices. First, we're going to look at the kinds of insights the self-reflection give before the lecture can potentially provide, together with some real responses that it has elicited from our pilot group. So just before the lecture, the participants write answers to these questions. So the questions are about the strengths in the topic, their confidence, and where they would like feedback from their peer observers. Right? So these questions have been designed to enable the lecturer to consider their upcoming lecture in a non-judgmental, also professional sense, to develop a self-awareness of their own teaching within their subject and discipline area. Next question. So these questions enable participants to think about the various individual aspects of the PCK in anticipation of the lecture. So this is an attempt to decomplexify the kind of thinking required when teaching. So this step does not replace lecture preparations, right? So if you look at some of the questions that we ask, that what are the strengths when it comes to teaching these topics, and the participants also answered like the strength can be patience, deep understanding of the content to be taught, understanding of the learning environment, also the concerns that the lecturer might have before giving the lecture. Some were like using online delivery systems. Also, if there can be concern that the content might not meet the level of the program. Also, not making the material relevant enough for the students to develop interest in the topic. Also, the familiarity of the content, the lecture, if the content will be very understood by the students, the very nature of solving problem can be tricky for students as well. And also, before you you go into the lecture, what kind of feedback would you be looking for or hoping for from your observers, right? So the participants also answered that where do I feel to improve to maximize my potential and growth in my teaching as an academic? How can I prepare myself for the environment? Also, pacing of explanations, whether if I'm teaching, will I be moving through the content and students not being able to follow, right? So for the part about peer review, they will then explain that, and then I'll come back to finish off self-reflection. Over to you, Dea.
Thank you, Mudzuli. So then the lecturer teaches their lecture with some peer observers present, and the peer observers use this to guide their feedback. The peer observers note the routine information about the lecture, such as the topic and the student group. They provide feedback on the pedagogic choices that the lecturer has made, like how the lecturer has chosen to make their content accessible to students, how the pedagogic strategy is appropriate for the content and the students being taught. The peer observers also give a presence appraisal, noting what personal and professional aspects, qualities of the lecturer stand out. And they give a forward focus in which they provide the lecturer with comprehensive feedback on what they did well and where they might improve in their next lecture. So just as an example of a PSCK analysis of these, the pedagogic choices questions that the peer observers answer shows that the feedback prompts a consideration of the appropriateness of the pedagogic strategies in terms of, is it appropriate for the content being taught as well as the students being taught? And the peer observers who've observed the lecturers have commented on aspects such as that the lecturer gives an outline of the tutorial up front. They unpack exactly how they got the answers. They use examples and that those examples are accessible. They talk about perhaps the lecturer needs to consider some support for students who are struggling or using a clearer PowerPoint that's not so cluttered, and so on. So then, as we said, within 24 hours after the lecturer will complete the self-evaluation of their lecture. And this is about reflecting on the extent to which the lecturer agrees with the statements in relation to their lecture. And it's been adapted from the induction tool for the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship Induction Program. And what's important here is that it gives lecturers the criteria for important choices that they need to make for all lectures. So in this way, the induction tool isn't a judgment, it's a let's show you, and what does teaching look like within your discipline? These are the things you need to consider. The task is designed to prompt lecturers not only to think about what they've already done, but also, therefore, what they should do in the next lecture. And it doesn't tell them what they should be, what a good learning activity is. It orients them towards developing a critical sensibility, I suppose, of being able to judge whether a learning task focused students' attention on key ideas or peripheral details, for example. It's not a my lecture was good or my lecture was bad evaluation tool. It's a space for lecturers to write their reasoning and notes for improvement. It kind of becomes an accountability partner. The questions on the self-evaluation give lecturers insight into 6 categories. They look at how they prepared, which again focuses them on different aspects of PCK. They look at the actual delivery, the actual instruction. They look at how they supported student learning, how they managed space and time, which was mentioned in the keynote this morning. They look and give an appraisal of how they did. And again, they've got a forward focus in terms of areas of development for the next lecture. Some of the self-evaluation that the lecturers have spoken about is how they felt that their content followed a logical path and there was real life application, and they were really impressed with how they managed their time. And for forward focus, there was really quite comprehensive reflection on a forward focus in terms of learning to teach online better and how to prepare slides more comprehensively. So if we put the whole tool together and look at what each part of the induction tool, what its purpose is, we kind of get something like this. And I'm going to refer to my notes. I do apologize. I just want to make sure I get this straight. Sections A to C give us a profile of the sample group for the study. So if this induction tool, in whatever form, goes forward, this will probably fall away once the study is done. Then Section D gives the participant insight into what makes their discipline unique and enables constructive alignment between their pedagogy and assessment practices. Section E, which is the self-reflection before the lecture, orients them to their own induction priorities. Section F is where they get feedback from peers, from critical friends. It offers them feedback and growth points based on their actual practice, as well as orienting them again to induction priorities. Section G gives the lecturers the criteria for that pedagogic thinking and planning, and again, forward focus to orient them to their induction priorities. And so our induction tool is not meant to be a once-off silver bullet. It's meant to be used repeatedly as a kind of like a scaffold for new lecturers' pedagogic thinking. And we're predicting over time that new lecturers could use less and less of the tool until they're only explicitly using Section G, as they gradually internalize and develop these specialist ways of thinking that are a mainstay of teaching anyway, as we saw in the specialization analysis of teaching earlier in the presentation. So as a group of newly appointed lecturers who come from a diverse range of disciplinary backgrounds, we're excited to see, as more and more of us use this tool, we're excited to see where it takes us, how it improves our practice, how it helps us to become aware of our practice. And thank you so much for listening, for your input that you're going to give us. And we hope that we can engage on this as we go forward in our ECAD project. And I would like to just give enormous thanks to Professor Lee Risniak, Director of the WITS LCT Hub, for her generous input to the project and her resources, as well as our ECAD mentor, Dr. Tanya Rauch van der Merwe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dale and Mudzuli, for that detailed and insightful presentation. So we have about 5 minutes left, so I'll just open up the floor for any questions, if anyone has any. I do know that there are some comments and questions in the chat. Neo, do you want to maybe just update us on what's happening in the chat?
Just the one that just came in now is that Abdul is asking, first of all, thanking you for the useful tool for new lecturers and asking if they can use the resources too.
Thank you very much. So right now it's still in pilot, but we will and we're going to be writing it up into a journal article. We're first going to taking it to SAERA in Bloemfontein in October, and then once it's finalized, we will definitely speak with CLTD and through the ECAD project, see what we can do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We also have 3 hands up. Laura, you can go ahead first.
Oh, thanks so much, and thanks for that excellent presentation. It just, was a very useful illustration of disciplinary nature of teaching and learning, and how important that is, and the importance to be that sort of self-awareness. I mean, I really like that idea of, how you compared the different knowledge and knowing across disciplines. My question is about how this approach would be located within existing support, some of which is generic, some of it's more tailor-made to the disciplines, within the university as a whole. So, for example, I'm just thinking that there's been such a big focus over the last few years on blended learning, moving beyond emergency remote teaching, and the importance of course design, that we design our courses, in a way that really enables that pathway that is a good combination of in-person and online in a very deliberate way, and so on. And there are, available courses on that. But what would be exciting is that this very reflexive and reflective process, and I agree with some of the comments that peer review processes could be incredibly generative. And I think those qualitative evaluations have always been so important, and I'm hoping that will really be bolstered in staff development. But I just wondered how this program could be situated, whether it would be developed within different disciplines, but there is room for coordinated staff development, some of which would be more generic. Thanks.
Mudzuli, do you want to take this? Would you want me to take it?
Yeah, please take it.
Okay. Truthfully, Laura, I'm not actually sure where it would be situated. I feel like it's come from a place of, I don't like the word generic, but a place of applicability across disciplines. But I suppose it could be open to tailoring within different disciplines if there are specifics that the disciplines would like to work on. So, something like the sciences might want to include some questions on practicals, labs and things like that. Whereas some of the humanities might want to add in questions about facilitating student performances. So I think there's definitely room for that. But where this came from was a place of, we can't assume a generic, this is how you teach kind of induction to new lecturers, but there is a need for an induction into teaching at Wits University, that this could, by getting the principles of teaching, enable discipline responsive teaching practice, the development of disciplinary responsive teaching practices. There we go. There's some words. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. I've got some ideas, but let's hear from others. Thanks.
Sorry, I was muted. Abdul Hamid, you can go next.
Thanks, Dale and Mudzuli for the presentation. I was quite interested by the findings and by the tool itself. Like I said in the chat, I think maybe to answer Laura's question a little bit, where I see the usefulness of it as a comment, I feel like within our spaces where there are early career academics, I think having that group amongst themselves, just as this came out from this group, between yourselves who were, working together on this, sort of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary way. I think within schools, using the tool and tailor making it for the discipline, as you mentioned, I think can be quite useful to empower early career academics in their own journeys. And I think that the self-reflective tool and the self-evaluation tool that you had that bookended the resource, I think are quite useful guiding mechanisms for early career teachers to understand the process and induct themselves into the discipline. And I particularly like the peer review aspect. So within our school, what we've been trying to do more purposefully is have a more structured mentorship program for our early career academics. And I think that peer review tool will be quite useful, for them to amongst themselves also to, I think sometimes with the peer review, as Laura was alluding to perhaps, is that sometimes there is that hierarchical power dynamic relationship that comes into play between the reviewer and the reviewee. And I think what the tool can be useful in is, sort of removing the power relationship a little bit and having those early career academics evaluate themselves in that sort of space where it's not punitive and it's for growth purposes. And I think one of the things I mentioned in my comment was, whether we could use the tool or not. And my suggestion would be that you could start piloting the tool, within different schools, getting them to play around with the tool, tailor make it, and see how they be. I mean, you're talking about waiting for it to be published, or and then making the tool available. But I think you could reach out to some places from now and pilot the tool already to see how it works, and whether tailor making it benefits the discipline specifically, etc., etc. But I think that was just my comment. My question was, really, what amongst yourself, what has been the key finding that you've come up with, or that you've taken from the tool itself in terms of the usefulness of it? Like, where has the biggest usefulness come from?
Okay, thank you so much, Abdul. I'm just gonna respond to the first bit, and then I'm gonna ask Mudzuli to reflect on what's been useful for him, because he's actually used the tool. I haven't yet been evaluated because our students at education have been on teaching experience, so we haven't been teaching. But I also see that being from different disciplines and different schools, and evaluating, watching, giving feedback to one another. We come with our own disciplinary expectations or understandings. So, like the feedback that myself and Muaphe gave to Mudzuli, if I look at it compared to the feedback that Irshad gave Mudzuli, you can see that we're coming from a teaching background and we're focusing on things that perhaps that Irshad wasn't. So Muaphe and I were giving Mudzuli feedback on managing the classroom space a bit more, whereas Irshad was more working with the disciplinary knowledge. And so I think there's a very real strength in the interdisciplinary, because we see things that others might not see in different spaces. So that's also something to consider. But I agree with you. Within schools, I think there can be a lot of development, and I'm going to definitely speak to our mentor about sharing this and the appropriate ways through which we can share. But Mudzuli, you want to share about what the process, what you got out of it?
Yes. So a lot of things, actually, I don't know where to begin. So what I found the most useful, particularly with us from chemistry, so we do, offer our programs to a lot of other faculties. And we notice that most of the students have trouble engaging with our content. Basically, they find it to be foreign for most of them. So I was teaching engineers, chemistry to engineers. And the first day I taught them, I asked them, why do you think you are doing chemistry? And most of them just look at me and they had no idea what they had to do. They just told me, oh, it's part of our curriculum. And then I asked them, how many of you think chemistry is relevant to your discipline? And only 2 students raised their hands. And that gave us an idea that for many of them, they don't know why they're doing the subject. Therefore, they don't actually want to engage with the material. So having to teach people who actually are not from your discipline, I wanted to find out that how do I go about that? How do I approach these type of students? And what kind of information can I gather from elsewhere that can potentially help me deliver my material in a way that can be impactful and help students understand what I'm teaching them. So I think this tool actually helped me see a lot of things and help me understand how I can approach the students in a different way.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your questions. So we're already 8 minutes over, but I see that Sarah has her hand up. So maybe quickly you can just ask your question.
Thanks. No, I'll be short because I do know we're supposed to be at our lunch break, I think. So thanks. I also want to echo congratulations for this tool. I think it's great. I do think the idea of when the time comes that looking at how different disciplines might tailor it could be a lesson in itself to see. I think the exercise of including who you include in that conversation and who you include in tailoring of a tool could itself bring out some values that are often hidden within disciplines about what is valued and where we situate ourselves. So that could be itself a really nice exercise. And so that's great. With the peer review, I like everyone said, I think I really like it. Something Gerrit had written in the comments is that there's been other initiatives around peer review formats and stuff, so opportunities maybe to look at what you're doing, compare it with others, but also when you are moving for promotion, that's not what you're thinking immediately when you start, but part of your teaching portfolio does include peer review, and it would be interesting to see how closely or not the kind of feedback that you are proposing is to what is proposed for those types of things. So it's also like a lower stakes test run in some ways of what that might be. And it also might inform conversations because these tools evolve. So it might also create sort of triggers that help people reflect again on what could I be doing differently? How can I expand as new staff in developing those teaching portfolios. So those are my only, not really needing response, but just reflections on what you're doing and just to congratulate you all on taking this initiative. Thanks.
Thank you.